Okay, so from here,
For
I've
some
got my
reason,
colored layers. I do
I
want
wanted
to
to go
add
ahead and make a
one
bit
darker,
darker,
slightly
slightly
darker
darker
green to give it a little bit more of a punch.
I would follow these steps.
So I'm just going to go ahead and use
Take
a low
one
capacity
channel
brush,
out of my image,
kind of a harder edge.
whichever one has the most contrast.
Not that
Now she's very
bad
yellow,
looking.
so there's probably not going to be very many, if any. Blue is going to be the best bet. So what I want to do is I want to duplicate that
just give it a
channel
little bit
to
of
a new
depth right
layer.
there.
So I'm going to go ahead
From
and
now,
right-click it and say
what I
duplicate.
could do is I could go
And then
back
here's
in
the key.
and then give it
You
this
want
some
to change the
texture.
destination to be a
And to do
new
that,
document.
it's going to be a little bit tricky.
Keeping it as a new
What I
document
want-
is going to
what
be
I want
one
to first
thing
do
that lets you
is take my only
work
unused
with it
layer
and then
that
not
I have
overwrite
nothing on,
what's currently
set it
in this
above
one.
everything else.
So
And
make
now
sure
you
the
can see
eyeball
that
is
I've got
on.
my original image with all my channels.
There's another
And I've got
fancy
my
filter you
copy
can
of
use.
that channel
It's called
that I can then manipulate however I want.
So
Render.
I'm going to go ahead and give it a
Different
little bit more
clouds.
my control is still
If I
broken.
do this,
It's really frustrating. I'm going to go ahead and give her a
render
little bit of
regular
contrast.
just a little bit.
It takes it and fills it with a big mess of color. It uses my two variations here.
To
The
convert
foreground
it to
and the
a
background
bitmap,
color.
all I need
And
to
all
do
it
is
does
go up
is
to
it generates
image
a random map
mode
of that.
bitmap.
So it says, oh, well, I'm just going to fill this with
72
whatever I feel
pixels per
like.
inch.
If I
Yeah,
do the
that's
same
fine.
thing again, it
Half
should
tone screen
not
is
be
the
the
mode that
same.
I want to choose.
And then say, okay,
Okay.
randomly generated pattern every single time. And here is where you specify
If
the
I choose two
frequency,
different colors,
duration,
white
the shape,
and black.
all that fun stuff. So let's say I want to make a bunch of circles across her face.
Come on.
I'm going to say round, frequency of I don't
And
know, 5 different clouds. You can see
lines
that
per
this
inch,
becomes something very
angle
similar
45
to what we're used to
degrees,
looking
and then
at.
say, okay, we'll see what
This
happens.
is a grayscale version of a gradient map.
She becomes a bunch of circles.
If you wanted to, what you could do is you could pick
I
a
was
channel
trying to
out
think
and
of a
you can
pun, and I
displace
couldn't
map
think of a
this,
successful one
but
just
I don't
now.
really feel like it. That's too much work. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is load a selection. What I'm going to
of
go
that.
ahead and do
Just right.
is just
hold
change
down
it to
Control
and then click the icon.
One of the color blending
Then
modes
click and
that
say
actually
save
looks a little bit
selection,
better.
like overlay, and then I'll
You say
tweak
save
the opacity
selection.
back just a bit, so it
You
gives
get
it
the
that texture
dialog
that,
box, and you can just
it
specify
didn't
where
have
it came
initially.
from.
3.jpg
Now what I could
is
do
the
is if I want to
original
have it
image, so I'm
only
just
on
gonna
the
say
sky,
okie dokie. I could make a selection
and
of
then
the
I'm done
layer
with
that I already
this.
have.
I don't need
Apply
this
mask,
anymore.
but I'm going to leave it open for now.
So that
just in
texture is
case.
only out there, but it's not
I'll
on
go back to
anything else.
3.jpg. You
If
can
I
see
wanted
that my
to invert
selection
that,
now
I
is
could
my
just
alpha
select my
channel right
mask,
here.
push Control I.
So I can
you can see
control
that
the cactus gets that texture,
and then I
as
can
opposed
go
to
and
everything
go
else.
make a
It's
fill
a
layer.
fancy, funky way of adding in just
with a,
randomized
I don't know, solid color
effects to an
And
image
let's do a gradient.
without very much work.
Be fancy. Say okay.
What I do want to do though is I want to add a little bit of noise and a little bit of
And then you
texture
can
into
choose
that
the colors
cactus. So I'm going to
of
invert
the
it,
gradient with the usual
and
gradient
then
toolbox.
I'm going to jump over to this layer.
So
I'm
if I
just
don't
gonna
want it to be skin, if I want it to be
my
red or
control doesn't
something
work
to
this
that
way.
effect, which is frustrating.
And if I want to adjust how the transparency fades in,
Go to my curves.
I can go ahead and play with my gradient.
You
here
can
as
see
well.
as
I change the curves on this, it affects the way that the colors are blending together. So I'm just going to find whatever looks aesthetically the most pleasing to me, say OK, and I'm good to go. I can, of course, adjust the angle and do all the other gradient fun stuff that I'm normally
Right about there.
used to doing.
And call
But
it.
I'm going to leave it at...
Anything else you would do to this? Anybody? Nothing?
Yep. All my
It's a pretty
channels
simplistic
are on.
image, but
And,
uses a couple of
you can
techniques
see
to
that here.
apply the layers.
So what it
primarily,
did
if you
is
look
it
at
took
each
that
one of these
and I just
individually,
filled it into that one
this is a overlaid
transparent gradient
58%.
channel.
I
With
mean,
that
I guess I
selection.
could go back in and change the opacity of this.
Started at red,
but that's a
went
little
all the way up
much.
to clear, and then if you wanted to, you can adjust that gradient
I like the texture and I like the look
as much
that
as
that
you want.
gives.
So you can say
It's
scale
close
it,
to what I was
fill
going
it,
for initially.
etc. So I've used my layer mask, I've used layer manipulation.
Gonna leave it at
I
that.
haven't distorted any layers,
And
but
say
you know
okay.
I'm okay with that. I don't really need to. If I wanted to, I
If
could.
you wanted to go
Okay.
back into that image
and then you
select
want to pull another
all
channel
and
out of it,
transform,
you can go just
somehow.
click over to this guy,
or let my
and
machine
go back
die
a few steps
and hope that it doesn't crash.
before you actually apply
There we
the
go.
dither or halftone screen. Go back, do it again.
If I
Pick a
wanted to
different
give it a
method.
little bit of scale.
So say you want instead of circles, instead you
can
want just
manipulate
gigantic
anything with the
boxes,
transform tool.
gigantic
It's really
squares.
quite
Let's
nice.
go with one.
So if you wanted to give it that little scale,
Angle,
kind of a little bit of
90
background,
degrees. So they
do
stack
like
on
that.
top of each other. Gotta go ahead and say
Just
okay.
drop it back so it's not so. in
And
your
this is
face
what
about
happens.
it.
Pretty sweet.
Or,
you
if
know
you ask
what?
me,
We can use our layer mask, make a selection out
And
of my
then erase
channel,
out the parts that we
again,
don't want.
Save that selection to the original
So
document.
I'm just going to use a feathered brush.
Now you'll see that channel pops in at the bottom here. So what I can do is
And
make
you
a
can see
selection of
that
this,
slowly just kind of fading out into the
and
background.
then
there.
make another fill layer.
Gives
I'm
it
just
a
gonna
little
choose
nice
a solid color
touch,
and say blue.
little
this time,
accent to the image, but
Just be
not
different.
enough to, take over it.
and say okay.
So that is pretty much the tutorial.
Now what if I don't
on
want
how
that
to
on her
use,
face? What
you
if
know,
I just
the
want that on a
paintbrush?
background? in Photoshop.
What I can do is
Your
I
layer
can go
modes,
into my mask.
importantly, are should
and
be
I can
set to
just
blend. Sorry,
paint
your
out
blending
the
modes
parts
should
that I
be
don't
set
want.
to multiply to get that kind of overlay
And then her face
feel
comes
to
right
it.
back.
If you don't have them set to multiply, you're not going to get the same kind of effect. What they're going to do is they're going to
And I
sit
get a
on
cool
top of
background out of
the,
it.
and I still get that kind of crazy texture.
And
Darker
it's a-
areas and make them look as if
Slightly
they're
more
in a
interesting
cloud.
image than it was before.
Multiply forces the dark stuff to come through, and you'll be good to go after that. So, using layer masks, blending modes,
Questions?
and a myriad of other things to do a watercolor
Surprisingly
painted effect
simple when
on
you
this
see it
image.
done. Okay. That's really
Hope you
all
enjoyed
it
it.
is. It's surprisingly simple.
There's no reason it should be difficult. It's just remembering the steps to get through this, the tricky part.